You were never meant to hear this, but you're already in too deep. There's a name whispered in old Pennsylvania courthouses, in the brittle pages of sealed adoption files, and in the trembling recollections of the last people who dared to ask questions. Hollowayne. A family whose history was never written, only buried. 12 children, none with birth certificates. 12 lives plucked from the invisible margins of society and sewn into a house that locals swore was haunted long before the Hollowaynes ever touched its doors. If you're still here, you'll want to listen closely. Not because you want to know, but because the moment you hear this, you'll never be able to go back to who you were before. This is DeadScroll. If you value truth more than safety, like this video, subscribe, and open your mind. I'm going to show you what happens when family, faith, and the law all turn into one unbreakable cage. The Hollowayne estate sat on the outskirts of Caldwell County, a sprawling Gothic house flanked by dead orchards and an iron fence so tall it seemed designed to keep something in, not out. Howard and Lucinda Hollowayne arrived in the winter of 1974. Nobody knew exactly where they came from, but Howard wasted no time purchasing the property in cash, and Lucinda wasted no time stepping into the role of the county's new lady of charity. To the public, they were elegance and benevolence incarnate. Howard, tall, severe, with a banker's posture and the handshake of a politician. Lucinda, soft-voiced, with perfect posture, speaking like she'd been trained to soothe and command in the same breath. They attended church twice a week. They funded the restoration of the local library. And when the first child appeared, a boy of about 4, silent and pale, no one thought to ask where he'd come from. That was the beginning. In the next 15 years, 11 more would follow. No school records, no hospital records, no birth certificates, just children who seemed to materialize, each with the same strange stillness in their eyes, like they were listening for instructions only they could hear. What the town didn't know was that these children weren't just adopted. They were acquired. At first, the Hollowaynes' generosity was beyond reproach. When Lucinda would walk through town with one of the children at her side, tiny hand folded in her silk glove palm, she looked every bit the angel she wanted you to see. They wore immaculate clothes, spoke only when spoken to, and never smiled unless she did first. But behind that perfect choreography was a strange absence. No one ever saw the children at the local school. The few times anyone asked, Lucinda would say they were educated at home to a higher standard. She would say it with a smile so warm, it made you feel rude for even wondering. Still, there were whispers. Some of the older townsfolk remembered seeing unmarked vans late at night, crawling up the gravel drive of the Hollowayne estate. No headlights, no engine noise that anyone could quite place. By morning, there would be another child, smaller than the last, always silent, sitting in the Hollowaynes' pew at church. One man, the gas station owner, Thomas Alder, claimed he once saw 2 men unloading crates from one of those vans. Not boxes for groceries or furniture. Heavy, metal cases that looked military. He told the sheriff, but the next day, Alder's store burned down in what was called an electrical accident. Alder left town within the week. Inside the Hollowayne house, the children moved like shadows. Those who delivered food or flowers described a silence that was too complete, as if the very walls had been designed to swallow sound. And sometimes they swore they heard it, a low, rhythmic sound from deep in the house. Not music, not machinery, more like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Lucinda told them it was just the old pipes settling. But in Caldwell County, people had lived with old pipes their whole lives, and none of them had ever sounded like that. The first sign that something inside the Hollowayne estate was wrong came on an autumn night in 1982. A boy, maybe 10 years old, was seen running barefoot along County Road 9, his white shirt torn, his skin streaked with mud. He didn't look back. He didn't call for help. He just ran. A truck driver spotted him, slowed down, and leaned out the window to ask if he was all right. The boy stopped in the headlights, his chest rising and falling too fast, eyes wide as if trying to decide whether the driver was real. Then he whispered something, just 2 words, before bolting into the tree line. By the time the driver called the sheriff, the boy was gone. They combed the woods until dawn, but they found nothing, not even footprints. The sheriff said it must have been a local kid playing games. The report never made it to the county archive. A month later, a new child appeared in the Hollowaynes Sunday pew, a boy about 10 years old. But the congregation swore he looked younger than the one who ran. And when someone asked him his name, Lucinda answered for him. The truck driver, a man named Harlan Briggs, started drinking heavier after that. He told a bartender once that he could still hear the boy's voice when he closed his eyes. The 2 words? Don't wait. No one could get him to explain what it meant. Her name was Marla Kincaid. She wasn't from Caldwell County, which was probably the only reason she even asked the question she did. She'd been hired by the Pennsylvania Sentinel to cover rural politics, but she had a knack for finding the cracks in small-town stories. In the spring of 1984, she heard the whispers about the Hollowaynes from a farmer who came to sell her eggs. He told her about the 12 children, or maybe 11, depending on who you asked, none of them with any official records. He told her about the vans, and about the boy who ran. At first, she didn't believe him. But when she checked county birth registries and found nothing, her curiosity turned to obsession. She visited the courthouse. She visited the church archives. She called neighboring counties. The same blank space appeared everywhere she looked, as if the children had been written out of existence. Then, one rainy evening, she drove past the Hollowayne estate and saw something she could never quite explain. A child, thin, barefoot, standing on the second-floor balcony. The rain plastered their hair to their head, and yet they didn't flinch, didn't move, just stared at her as she slowed her car. It wasn't until she pulled away that she realized something was wrong with the child's eyes. They weren't reflecting the headlights at all. The next morning, Marla received a letter in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, the Hollowayne house at night, with her car parked just beyond the fence. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, were 3 words. Go back home. Warnings only work on people who feel fear. Marla Kincaid wasn't one of them. 2 nights after receiving the photograph, she slipped into the basement of the Caldwell County Records office. She'd spent enough time with the clerk to know where the spare key was kept, and she knew which cabinets hadn't been touched in decades. The air was damp, thick with the smell of mold and paper rot. Her flashlight swept over stacks of brittle folders, each labeled in fading typewriter ink. Births, deaths, marriages, adoptions. She flipped through the A's, the B's, the C's, until she realized something. The H drawer was missing entirely. Not just locked, gone. She widened her search, combing through unlabeled boxes shoved to the far wall. And there, under a stack of water-damaged property deeds, she found it, a thin, unmarked envelope, sealed with a strip of black wax. Inside were 12 photographs, each one a child, alone, staring straight at the camera. No smiles, no names, no dates. The paper stock was expensive, but the backgrounds were unsettling, blank white walls, and in some cases what looked like faint shadows moving behind the child. The 12th photo was different. It showed an empty wooden chair. On the back, in the same neat handwriting as the note she'd received, were 2 words. Number 13. As she stood in that basement, she realized the silence around her felt too perfect. And that was when she heard it. Footsteps, deliberate and slow, above her. Marla froze. The records office was locked. The only cars outside were her own and the clerk's, and she'd seen the clerk leave hours ago. The footsteps above her weren't hurried. They were measured, like someone knew exactly where they were going. A faint hum followed them, low, tuneless, almost like someone humming just to fill the air. She shut off her flashlight. The darkness was instant and absolute. Dust swirled in the narrow beam of moonlight spilling from a high basement window. She pressed herself into the corner, clutching the envelope of photographs. The sound moved toward the stairwell. 1 step, pause, another step, then nothing. Marla's pulse thudded in her ears. She was about to make a run for it when a whisper came from the bottom of the stairs. You shouldn't keep those. The voice wasn't angry. It was calm, matter of fact, like a teacher correcting a student. When she didn't answer, the voice spoke again, this time closer. They already know you're here. She bolted, up the stairs, down the main hall, shoving the heavy door open into the cold night. She didn't stop running until she was in her car, tires screeching as she tore away from the courthouse. Only when she got home did she realize the envelope was gone. The first thing Marla noticed the next morning was the smell. Something faint but metallic drifted through the seams of her apartment door. When she opened it, a small parcel sat neatly on the mat. No postage, no return address, just her name, handwritten in black ink. Inside was a pair of children's shoes, scuffed leather, laces tied into perfect bows. The soles were caked with reddish-brown dirt, the kind she'd only ever seen on the back roads near the Hollowayne property. Tucked into one shoe was a folded slip of paper. Number 13 is waiting. She spent the day pacing her apartment, blinds drawn, phone in hand. By nightfall, she'd convinced herself it was nothing more than intimidation, something she could still write her way out of. That's when the lights went out. Every bulb in the apartment blinked off at once, leaving her in pitch black. She reached for the flashlight she kept by the couch, but before she could click it on, a shape moved across the faint glow of the window. Not a person. Not quite. The proportions were wrong. Too long in the limbs, too still in the head. It stood there for several seconds, perfectly framed in the glass, watching her without the faintest sign of breath. Then it turned and walked away, not toward the stairs, but toward the far end of the building. The only thing in that direction was the fire escape. When Marla rushed to the window, it was gone. On the street below, a black van rolled away without headlights. By the time the sun rose, Marla had made up her mind. If they wanted her scared, she'd give them something worse, attention. But first she needed proof. Real proof. She parked her car a mile from the Hollowayne estate and hiked the rest on foot, staying off the road. The morning fog clung to the fields, muting every sound except the distant, slow thump that seemed to come from the direction of the house. It wasn't a machine, she realized. It was too irregular. The estate loomed ahead, all sharp angles and dark windows. From a distance, the house looked asleep, but the longer she stared, the more she felt it was staring back. She circled the perimeter, eventually finding a gap in the rusted iron fence. Beyond it, the grass gave way to a narrow stone path that led toward an outbuilding she'd never seen before, squat, windowless, with a heavy steel door. A sound drifted from inside. Not voices. Not exactly. More like a low, drawn-out chant, layered and overlapping, as if many people were speaking in unison but slightly out of sync. Her hand shook as she reached for the door handle, but it turned easily, no lock at all. Inside, the air was thick and warm, smelling faintly of copper and something sweetly rotten. The walls were lined with tall wooden crates, each marked with a number. She counted to 12. Then, against the far wall, was a 13th crate, newer, unmarked. Something moved inside it. Marla hesitated only a second before unlatching the crate. The hinges groaned, releasing a rush of air that was cold against her face, far colder than the room around it. Inside sat a child, or at least it looked like a child at first glance. Knees pulled to chest, head bowed, hair hanging in matted strands. The skin was pale in a way that didn't seem natural, stretched too tight over the bones. "Hey," she whispered, crouching down. "It's okay. I'm here to help." The head lifted. The eyes were wrong. No whites, no pupils. Just two polished black surfaces that seemed to drink in the light. And when the mouth opened, it was not to speak, but to exhale a slow, steady breath that chilled her skin. The chanting outside the building grew louder. Marla stepped back, but the child moved forward, crawling out of the crate with a stiffness that felt practiced, deliberate. It stood in front of her, head tilting to one side like it was studying her. Then it smiled. The sound of footsteps thundered toward the door. She turned, expecting to see Hollowayne men, but the doorway was filled instead with more children, each one wearing the same too-wide smile, each one stepping forward in perfect unison. The one from the crate reached for her hand, and when its cold fingers closed around hers, she heard a voice inside her head say, "Number 14." Marla's first instinct was to yank her hand away, but the cold grip was impossibly strong. The voice in her head wasn't the child's mouth moving. It was something older, something vast threading its way through her thoughts. 14 makes the circle whole. The chanting outside stopped. The silence was worse. One of the other children stepped forward and touched her shoulder. In that moment, she saw, not with her eyes, but with something deeper, flashes of the Hollowayne estate over decades. Different owners, different faces, but always the same children, unchanged, standing in the background of yellowing photographs. She saw the crates arriving in the dead of night, each one carrying something that had once been human but wasn't anymore. She saw the black vans on roads that weren't roads at all, and she saw herself, standing exactly where she was now, in a memory that had not yet happened. The child from the crate spoke aloud this time, voice flat but certain. "You came here. That means you're ready." From somewhere behind the rows of crates, a tall figure emerged. It wasn't one of the Hollowaynes she'd seen before. This one was gaunt, dressed in a long black coat, face lost in shadow. The children parted for it without a word. "Welcome home," it said. The figure in the black coat turned and walked toward the steel door, expecting her to follow. The children flanked her on both sides, their small hands brushing against her arms, guiding her without force. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the estate in a gray so dense it seemed solid. The figure led her up the narrow stone path toward the main house. The Hollowayne residence was older than the official records claimed. Up close, the bricks were mismatched, some worn nearly smooth, others jagged and pitted. The windows were dark, but she felt eyes moving behind the glass. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with a faint scent of beeswax and something faintly medicinal. The walls were lined with portraits, everyone depicting a family in formal dress. The faces changed over the years, but there was always the same formation, adults in front, children in back. And in every frame, the same 12 children stood in the same positions, unchanged by time. The figure stopped in a long hallway, lit only by a fire at the far end. "This is where we keep the history," it said. Its voice was low, deliberate, every syllable placed with care. It gestured toward a heavy wooden door banded with black iron. The children stood behind her now, silent, expectant. Marla's fingers trembled as she reached for the latch. The latch gave way with a dry click. The door swung inward, releasing a gust of air that smelled faintly of damp earth and candle smoke. The room beyond was circular, its stone walls lined with shelves that rose all the way to the vaulted ceiling. But instead of books, the shelves held jars, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each filled with something suspended in a cloudy, amber fluid. Marla stepped closer to one shelf. The jars weren't labeled. She leaned in to look more closely and saw what floated inside. Small, pale objects that might have been roots or twigs at first glance, until she noticed the fingernails. They were hands. Tiny, perfectly preserved children's hands. In the center of the room stood a table draped with dark cloth. Resting on it was a thick ledger bound in cracked leather. The figure in the black coat gestured for her to open it. She did. The pages were filled with names, dates, and numbers, stretching back over a century. Every few pages, one word appeared in bold, written in a hand so sharp it almost cut the paper. Complete. Her own name was written at the very bottom of the most recent page. No date yet, just the number, 14. The figure's shadow fell over the ledger. "This is not a curse," it said softly. "It is continuity. The children keep the family. The family keeps the land." The jars seemed to hum in the silence that followed. The figure in the black coat closed the ledger with a dull thud. "When a circle is complete," it said, "the family endures another century." Marla stepped back. "And the children?" "They're not children anymore," the figure replied. "They're the circle. The land breathes through them. Without the circle, the Hollowayne name would be dust." The children had moved into the room now, forming a wide ring around the table. Their polished black eyes reflected the faint light of the candles, making them look like pools of ink. One of them, the child from the crate, reached forward and took her hand again. This time, the vision came instantly. She saw the estate in ruin, its windows gaping, its bricks crumbling. The fields were barren, the air thick with the smell of decay. And in the center of it all, a hole in the earth, deep, dark, and endlessly hungry. She felt herself falling toward it, the wind tearing at her skin, until 12 small, cold hands caught her. "We keep you. You keep us." The vision snapped away. When she blinked, the figure in the black coat was holding out an old silver key. "It's your choice," it said. "Join the circle, and you will never die. Refuse, and the land will take you anyway." Marla stared at the key. Her mind flicked through every escape route, every possible trick, but the children were between her and the door, and the figure's shadow seemed to fill every corner of the room. "What happens if I take it?" she asked. The figure smiled faintly. "You'll understand. You'll remember that you've always been here. And if I don't," it tilted its head, as if surprised she even needed to ask, "then the land will keep you another way. The circle will still be complete. You just won't be comfortable." The cold fingers around her hand tightened. She felt the pressure of more than flesh, like the weight of soil pressing down, like roots wrapping her bones. The children leaned forward in unison, and for a moment their faces blurred, each one shifting into something older, sharper, inhuman. The chanting returned, low at first, then swelling until it filled her skull. Her knees buckled. The silver key glinted in the firelight, dangling between them. Her hand rose, she couldn't stop it, and closed around the key. The chanting stopped. The figure stepped back and inclined its head. 14. And in that instant, every memory she'd brought with her, her apartment, her job, her own name, drained away like water from a broken jar. All that remained was the Hollowaynes estate and the circle. They led her to a room on the second floor. The bed was carved from dark wood, its headboard etched with looping patterns that seemed to shift if she stared too long. Heavy curtains sealed the windows, but she could feel the fog pressing against the glass. The children left without a word, except for the one from the crate, who lingered in the doorway. "You'll sleep, and when you wake, you'll know where to go," it said. Then it closed the door. The air in the room was warm, but the sheets were cold when she lay down, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. She closed her eyes, and immediately the dream began. She stood outside under a moon that was too large, too close. The estate's fields stretched endlessly, but they were not fields anymore. They were graves. From each mound of earth rose a faint thread of light, drifting upward into the black sky. The other children were there, dressed in the same night clothes she now wore. They moved in perfect synchronization, hands touching the earth, drawing more light upward. When she looked down at her own hands, she saw the soil clinging to her fingers, pulsing faintly with each beat of her heart. A voice, not the figures, not the children's, spoke from the ground itself. "You're the root now." When she woke, the curtains were open. Outside, the fog was gone. The fields were green and full again. The figure in the black coat was waiting at her door. "You've slept well," it said, though she couldn't tell if it was a statement or a command. It led her down a back staircase into a part of the house she hadn't seen before, a narrow corridor lined with lanterns that gave off no smoke. The stone floor was damp, and the air smelled faintly of iron. They emerged into a courtyard she hadn't noticed from outside. In its center stood a single massive tree, its trunk black as char, its branches bare. Yet the roots writhed beneath the soil as if searching for something. The children were already there, kneeling in a perfect ring around the tree. Each had a small silver knife in one hand. Without being told, Marla understood. She stepped into the empty space that completed the circle. The figure handed her a knife. "The land feeds us," it said. "We feed it in return." On some signal she couldn't hear, the children pressed their blades to their palms and let the blood drip into the dirt. Marla felt her own hand move, the knife's edge kissing her skin. Warm drops fell, and the tree's roots stilled, drinking deeply. When it was done, the children stood and walked away without a word. Marla stayed, watching as the first buds appeared along the tree's blackened branches. She realized she wasn't horrified. In fact, she felt necessary. That night, the dreams returned. Only this time, she stood at the edge of the estate, where the forest began. The trees there were wrong. Too tall, their trunks spiraling upward like twisted ropes, their leaves glinting as if made of wet stone. A path wound through them, and she knew without question she was meant to follow it. The children were already ahead, their bare feet silent on the damp ground. They stopped at a clearing where the earth sagged inward, forming a wide pit. The air above it shimmered like heat on asphalt. From within came a slow, steady breathing, not human, but something far larger. The figure in the black coat was there too, standing at the rim. "Blood is not enough," it said. "The land is alive. It dreams through us, and when it hungers, it must be fed." Marla looked into the pit. Shapes moved in the dark, rising toward the surface. They were not animals, nor entirely human, pale, elongated things with faces that seemed both ancient and newborn. Their eyes were milky and unblinking. The figure turned to her. "You will learn when to bring them what they need." And sometimes it glanced at the children. Sometimes the circle decides who goes in. One of the pale shapes reached the edge of the pit and pressed a long, damp hand against the soil as if testing it. Marla's chest tightened, but not from fear. It was the same pull she'd felt at the tree, a deep certainty that this was her place. The night chosen for the feeding was windless, the air thick enough to taste. The children gathered silently at her door, their eyes bright in the dark. Each carried something wrapped in black cloth. Marla didn't need to ask what. They led her through the forest, down the same spiraling path from her dream, until the pit yawned before them once more. The pale shapes inside stirred, their slow, breathing quickening. The figure in the black coat stood opposite her. "Tonight, you will see why the circle cannot be broken." One by one, the children stepped forward, unwrapping their bundles. Inside were animals, rabbits, a fox, something that might have been a deer, all perfectly still, though their bodies looked fresh. The offerings were lowered into the pit. The pale shapes surged upward, their movements jerky, almost joyous, as they dragged the bodies down. When the last child had stepped back, the figure gestured to her. "Now you." She looked down at her bundle. It was smaller than the others, and heavier than it should have been. The cloth was warm against her hands. When she peeled it back, she saw a face. Not a stranger's face. The man from the bus station, the one who'd sat 2 seats behind her on the ride to Hollowayne, his eyes wide and glassy, his lips parted as if mid-sentence. A shudder went through her, but the circle's eyes were all on her now. The pit's breath washed over her, damp and cold. Her hands moved without her consent. She lowered the body. The pale shapes reached for it, their milky eyes locking with hers as they pulled it under. When it was over, the forest was silent. The pit exhaled once, and the shimmer above it faded. The figure's voice was almost kind. "You fed the land. Now it will keep you." Weeks passed, measured not by days, but by the rhythm of the feedings. The tree flourished. The fields thickened with green. The air around Hollowayne tasted sweet again. But in her dreams, the pit grew restless. She began to hear it before she saw it, a low, drawn-out hum, vibrating through her bones. When she reached the clearing, the pale shapes stood clustered at the rim, staring out rather than up. One of them spoke. The voice was a rasp, like leaves dragged across stone. "Bring us one that breathes." When she woke, her hand was bleeding, crescent marks from where her own nails had bitten into her palm. That morning, the figure in the black coat was waiting at the breakfast table. "The land has made a request," it said, as if discussing the weather. "It's rare, important." Marla stared. "It wants someone alive." The figure nodded. "The pit dreams a breath of warmth. Once in a century, it must be reminded what living flesh feels like before the roots take it." The children watched her silently, their black eyes unblinking. One of them pushed a slip of paper toward her. A name was written on it in looping script. She didn't recognize it, but she knew, with the same deep certainty as all things here, that she would find them. The name on the slip was all she had, but it was enough. When she stepped beyond the fog that marked Hollowayne's edge, the air changed, sharper, cleaner, but somehow thinner, as if she'd stepped into a place where the earth breathed more shallowly. The bus ride into the nearest town felt strange, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. People moved past her in a rush of chatter and color, but they all seemed dim, like painted cutouts. Only one face stood out, sharp and alive, the one from the slip. A man in his 20s, carrying a canvas satchel, walking with the kind of confidence that said he knew exactly where he was going. Marla followed him through streets, across a small park, into the shade of an oak. He sat on a bench, pulled a notebook from his bag, and began to write. She stood behind him for a full minute before he looked up. "Can I help you?" he asked. Her mouth formed words she didn't entirely choose. "I think you've been looking for me." His brows knit. "Do I know you?" She smiled. "Not yet." By nightfall, he was walking beside her back toward the fog. Every time he hesitated, she spoke softly, and his doubts seemed to peel away. By the time they reached the estate's border, his hand was in hers. Somewhere far away, beneath the ground, the pit was breathing faster. The children waited at the edge of the forest, their pale faces half-lit by lantern glow. The man slowed when he saw them, but Marla's hand tightened around his, and he didn't pull away. The figure in the black coat appeared from the trees. "You've done well," it said. "Bring him." They led him down the winding path, the same damp air thickening with each step. The pit was already awake, the shimmer above it trembling, the pale shapes gathered, swaying like reeds in a current. The man stopped at the rim. "What is this?" Marla stepped close enough to feel the heat of his breath. "Home," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant his or hers. The figure placed a hand on her shoulder. "You may give him, or you may push him. The land cares only that he arrives alive." For a moment, she thought about turning him back. She thought about his quiet smile in the park, the way he'd leaned toward her on the walk here. But the pit's breath was in her lungs now, filling her like a tide. She let go of his hand. The shapes surged upward, taking him in one swift, soundless motion. His last expression was not fear, but confusion, as if the rules of the world had just shifted. The shimmer flared white, then faded. The pit exhaled a deep, satisfied breath. The figure's voice was softer than she expected. "Now you belong entirely." And she knew it was true. The dreams changed. No longer was she standing at the rim, watching from above. Now she was in the pit, the soil warm around her ankles, the roots coiling like snakes to let her pass. The pale shapes stood back, their milky eyes lowered, as if she were one of them. A voice threaded through the dark. Not the figures, not the children's. It was the land itself, speaking through the slow grind of stone and the creak of buried wood. "You're mine now." When she woke, the whisper didn't fade. It followed her through the corridors of the estate, through the dining hall, through the lantern-lit nights. Sometimes it spoke in single words, "Come, feed, dig," and other times it murmured things she couldn't understand, syllables older than breath. The children seemed to notice. They watched her differently, not with suspicion, but with a kind of wary respect. One even stepped aside for her in the hallway, something she'd never seen before. One evening, the figure in the black coat found her by the black-rooted tree. "It speaks to you now," it said, as if confirming something long expected. "That means it will ask more." Marla touched the bark, feeling the faint pulse beneath it. "More than blood." The figure smiled without warmth. "Much more." That night, the whisper came while she was still awake. It slid into her thoughts like a hand into water, rippling everything she'd been thinking. Not the circle, not the coat, only you. Her pulse quickened. "What do you want?" She thought back, though she wasn't sure if the words were hers or the land's. The answer bloomed slow and deliberate. "One of the children." She sat up in bed. The whisper continued, steady as breath. "They do not all serve me. One dreams of leaving. He would break the roots. Bring him." Marla thought of their blank stares, their small, pale hands. She thought of the night they'd brought her to the pit for the first time, how they'd pressed the warm bundle into her arms. In the hallway, she heard soft footsteps. A boy appeared in the doorway, no older than 12, holding a candle that dripped onto his wrist without making him flinch. "They're watching you," he said. Her voice was a rasp. "Who?" He blew out the candle, and the dark between them felt suddenly alive. Everyone. When she lit her own lantern, he was gone. The whisper pulsed again. Bring him before the next moon. Marla spent the next day watching the children more closely. They moved in their perfect, silent patterns, carrying wood, polishing the black stone floors, fetching water from the spring, but she noticed the cracks. A glance held too long at the fog beyond the estate. A hand that lingered on a door latch. She was almost certain she knew which boy the land meant. He worked in the garden, his pale hair catching the dim light like spun glass. When the figure in the black coat passed, his gaze dropped too quickly, as though he feared what might be read in it. The whisper was constant now, threading into her thoughts no matter what she tried to think about. Bring him. Femia's breath. But another thought kept rising, stubborn, unwelcome. What if the boy's dream of leaving was not a threat, but a way out? That night, she stood at the edge of the pit alone. The shapes below swayed in the darkness, but did not reach for her. She crouched, feeling the damp breath rise against her face. If I refuse, she whispered, what will you do to me? The earth answered with a deep, slow rumble. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The next morning, Marla went to the garden. The boy knelt among the black-stemmed plants, cutting herbs with a small blade. He didn't look up until her shadow crossed the soil. You like it out here? She asked. He shrugged. Better than in there. His voice was quiet but not afraid. Marla crouched beside him. Have you ever been beyond the fog? That made him pause. He set the blade down. Once, when I was little, before they brought me back. What did you see? He glanced toward the tree line, as though checking if anyone was listening. Light. Real light. It felt warm. She studied him, trying to hear if the whisper in her head grew louder. It didn't, but it was still there, patient, insistent. If you could go again, she said carefully, would you? The boy met her eyes. For a heartbeat, there was no blankness, no practiced stillness. Only something alive and sharp. Yes, but they'd never let me. Marla felt the roots shifting under the soil, listening. The pit's breath was slow, steady, waiting for her decision. That night, Marla didn't sleep. She sat in the corridor outside her room, listening for the soft shuffle of the children's bare feet as they moved through their unseen tasks. When the boy passed with a pail of water, she rose silently and followed. He didn't seem startled when he realized she was behind him. Instead, he set the pail down and whispered, You've heard it, haven't you? The thing under the ground. Marla felt the hair at the back of her neck lift. What do you know about it? His mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. Enough to know it lies. It tells you what it needs, but never why. They stood in the shadowed hallway, the damp air pressing against their skin. If I could get you to the fog, she said slowly, would you run? Yes. No hesitation. She looked toward the black-rooted tree through the window. The whisper in her mind sharpened, cutting through her thoughts. Betray me, and you will join the roots. Marla turned back to the boy. Then we'll need to be quiet. And fast. From the far end of the hall, a floorboard groaned. They both froze. A pale figure was watching them. Not one of the children. The figure in the black coat stepped into the weak lamplight. Its shadow stretched along the hallway floor like a reaching arm. You've taken an interest in the boy, it said. Not a question. Marla kept her voice even. I talked to all of them. The figure's head tilted. You were brought here to serve the land, not to make friends. It looked at the boy, who stared back with a defiance that made Marla's pulse quicken. Some roots, the figure went on, grow in the wrong direction. They must be cut before they rot the tree. Marla forced her hands to stay loose at her sides. And if the wrong root is the one keeping the tree alive? The figure's smile was thin. Then we plant another. It turned to the boy. Go back to your quarters. The boy didn't move until Marla gave the smallest nod. He slipped away into the dark, the sound of his steps vanishing almost immediately. When they were alone, the figure stepped closer. If the land whispers to you, you should know it can also scream. Do not make it scream, Marla. The weight of the warning pressed on her chest like a stone. But beneath it, a spark kindled, a fire the land's whispers hadn't warned against. In the quiet hours before dawn, Marla met with the boy in the cellar beneath the old house. The air was cold and smelled of damp wood and secrets. We have to move before they notice, she whispered, tracing a rough map in the dust. There's a path through the woods, past the iron gate, then the river. After that, it's clear. He nodded, eyes wide but steady. What about the others? Too risky. If they come looking, I'll stall them. You run. Find safety. Find light. He swallowed hard. And if you don't come with me? Her smile was faint but sure. I'm coming. But first, I have to silence the roots. The shadows shifted as footsteps approached. They froze. The figure's voice was a whisper in the dark. You plan rebellion. Marla faced the figure, heart pounding like a war drum in the silence. You control this land, she said, voice steady despite the storm inside. But I control what walks from it. The figure's eyes glinted, cold and unreadable. A dangerous claim. She stepped forward, hands open but firm. I will not let you steal more lives. Not today. For a moment, the world held its breath. Roots throbbed beneath the floor, and the pale shapes of the windows pressed their faces like ghosts desperate to see. The figure smiled, almost amused. Then you choose to fight the land itself. Few survive such defiance. Marla's answer was a fierce whisper. Then let me be one of the few. The figure's shadow flickered. It reached out a hand, not to strike but to touch. Remember, Marla, the deepest roots are the hardest to break. The night swallowed their footsteps as Marla and the boy slipped through the shadowed halls. Every creak sounded like a summons, every breath a potential betrayal. The children's eyes glimmered behind windows, silent witnesses to the escape. The figure in the black coat was nowhere to be seen, but Marla felt its presence like a tightening noose. At the iron gate, her hands trembled as she fumbled with the rusted lock. Behind her, the whisper rose, sharp, urgent. Run. Run before the roots tighten. The boy's grip on her wrist was steady. We're almost free. The gate creaked open, the cold air biting at their skin. But freedom was a lie waiting in the dark. A low rumble shook the earth. The pit had awakened fully, angered by the betrayal. From the shadows, the pale shapes surged, their milky eyes blazing with hunger. Marla pulled the boy forward, heart hammering, feet pounding, as the roots of Hollowayne reached out like claws beneath the soil. The forest swallowed their breath, the roots cracking and tearing beneath their feet. Behind them, the chorus of the pit's fury rose, a sound not meant for human ears. Branches snapped like bones, shadows lunged from every direction. The boy stumbled, but Marla caught him before he fell. Keep moving, she gasped, voice raw and fierce. They dodged twisted trunks and grasping vines, the land itself trying to drag them back into its maw. The whisper in her mind turned into a scream, the land's rage unleashed. But somewhere beyond the chaos, a faint glow flickered. Light, a promise of something better. She forced herself forward, drawing on every ounce of strength. If they made it, they'd be free, but if they failed, they would become roots, swallowed by Hollowayne forever. The river loomed ahead, dark and swift, a barrier between captivity and freedom. Marla could hear the rush of water, the breath of open air waiting on the other side. But the land was relentless. The pale shapes closed in, silent but unyielding. The boy looked at her, eyes wide but determined. We can't stop now. She nodded, heart pounding, and together they plunged into the cold current. The water closed over them, biting and sharp but also cleansing. Behind them, the roar of the pit was deafening, a final cry of rage and loss. When they reached the opposite bank, dripping and gasping, the whisper was gone. Only silence. Freedom. But Marla knew this was only the beginning. The roots of Hollowayne had been broken, but the darkness still lingered, waiting for the next hunger. The dawn broke cold and sharp over the distant hills, painting the sky in pale fire. Marla stood at the riverbank, the boy beside her, both trembling but alive, ghosts freed from a shadowed prison. But freedom came with a price. The land's whispers had not ended. They had only changed, settling deep inside her like a dark seed. She understood now the truth no one else could see, that some roots grow beneath the earth, unseen but unbreakable, that power is never truly surrendered. The Hollowayne estate was silent behind them, but its hunger lingered in the wind, a promise of secrets yet to be uncovered and battles yet to be fought. Marla's eyes hardened with the knowledge she now carried, knowledge that would change her forever. This was not an end. It was the beginning of a new war, a war for control over the shadows that live within us all. And she was ready. If this truth unsettled you, if these shadows awakened something inside, make sure you don't stay in the dark. Hit that like button to show you're awake. Subscribe now, and join the few who dare to see beyond the veil. Share this story with those ready to uncover the secrets they were never meant to know. This is just the beginning. Stay vigilant.